Hello, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Barbara Mitchell, class of 1983, and I'm introducing Ellen Taaffe. She's got an amazing background and will speak with us today about building and leading inclusive cultures that support women's leadership. Ellen is a Kellogg grad and a clinical assistant professor at Kellogg. She teaches personal leadership insights and is the director of the Women's Leadership Programming. She designs and delivers the Women's Leadership Seminar Series. She's a featured speaker and executive coach in Kellogg's leadership and governance programs. Ellen contributes to corporations, conferences, and universities, and in media such as TEDx, The Washington Post, Business Insider, Forbes, and Ms. Magazine. Prior to her academic and coaching career, Ellen spent 25 years with Fortune 500 companies, holding top marketing management posts at PepsiCo, Royal Caribbean, Whirlpool, and many others. Ellen also has a very important starring role as mom to two daughters. So wow, Ellen, you are exactly the woman that I hoped for when I marched in the streets of Washington, D.C. in the 1970s during my wayward youth. I'm a longtime women's and Latina activist and campaigner. So I'm very heartened for the opportunity to learn how men and women can build and lead inclusive cultures that support women's leadership, particularly for economic empowerment. Given the severe impact that the pandemic has had and continues to have on women and people of color, this topic is real importance to us. So I'd like to start, though, by asking what inspired you to transition from a corporate career into women's leadership and inclusion?
Sure. Thank you, Barbara. I am so glad to be here with you, and thank you to Jeff King for inviting me. I've heard so much about the Dallas Alumni Association and this symposium, so thrilled to be here. As you said, I had a long corporate career. And as I started to move across industries, I started to see some real differences in how women were advancing, how they looked through from, the early years to mid-career and to senior levels. I also joined my first corporate board, and I found I was the only woman. I joined another board, I was the only woman. And to be honest with you, I sort of woke up later in my career and realized, wow, women weren't advancing as much as I would have thought in my early years. And I had started my career with Quaker Oats as the only woman in the account representative class in the 80s. And then here I was the only woman on these boards. And I was really, it kind of opened me up to being determined about how do I make sure that's not the bookends of my career? I have two daughters who are young adults, and I want it to be a different world for them too. And so, after corporate career, I ran a small business for 5 years. After that was sold, I became an executive coach. And when I heard about the Kellogg initiative to advance women, I was like, can I get the job description? How do I sign up for that? And then a couple of years in, I was able to add on teaching, co-ed teaching as well. So it's a perfect fit from a career perspective, as I kind of feel like I was building my competency earlier in my career, building my mastery as I moved across industries and joined boards. And now I'm really in the legacy part of my career, where I really am focused on things where I feel like I can make a difference. And advancing women and inclusion is one of those things.
Oh, well, that's great. And as a woman who works in cybersecurity technology, I can so relate to the no women thing. So, or very few women or very few people of color. And it's a little disappointing to still be having this conversation, and that's what I appreciate about your topic, which is, how to build, what can we do? Let's be, very proactive here, because I really think, especially as the previous speakers were saying, particularly now, people really are looking for how they can advance this and advance the cause of women, advance the cause of people of color. People seem to be to use the overused phrase, but maybe it's not overused yet, but to be a lot more woken up about it. So, but given that, we've both had this conversation for a number of years. As I said, I graduated in '83, and I'd been out marching in the streets in the early '70s. How has the advancing women conversation changed over time? What do you see as the shift there?
Well, I think the validation of the business case for diverse thinking and diverse leadership is no longer questioned, and I think as companies, it's not only our moral duty to make sure our companies reflect our society, but it's also really, it's the right thing to do, and it's the smart thing to do. And so, so that's been a big change, that idea of as companies want to have growth, that's driven much of the time by innovation, and innovation's driven by diverse thinking. And so that's part of it, that business case. We still need to reestablish that frequently and communicate that frequently, especially where it might feel like a zero-sum game. But that's part of it. I also think it's really shifted from the idea of diversity, which is like the numbers, to inclusion. So you can have more women in, but if they don't stay, if they don't feel like they belong and can contribute and have careers and belief in their future there, it's gonna be an empty bucket. You're gonna keep rehiring people as people exit. So that's really changed. I think some things like myths, like, oh, women are gonna leave after they have babies. They may leave, and much of the time, I think those myths have been, overturned in many ways, because frequently women leave because they don't see those opportunities. And as they weigh their choices, all those different things, they leave, but it's not for the reasons that I think we once thought. This was touched on in the last session, but I think 10 years ago, people were saying, I don't see gender, or I don't see color or culture. And the reality is that that's not a good thing to say anymore, because it doesn't acknowledge our lived experience. It actually negates that lived experience of people who are different than the majority. So it's changed in that way too. And I think the expectations of I teach a lot of millennials. I have Gen Z daughters. Our younger generation grew up in a more diversity, and they want something different. So while right now it's tough to get a job for a lot of people, we're going to get back to the talent war. And to win the war on talent, you really have to have a more inclusive organization. And then I guess the last thing I would say is COVID is so scary for what it's doing for women. I read a statistic that 1 in 3 moms are considering opting out because it's so much with homeschooling, with everyone in a household, with all the caregiving, whether it's elder care, child care, not to mention full-time jobs. So we're at a real pivotal point to go after this. I reflect on what Michelle Buck said earlier of when you take a crisis and turn it into a turning point. That's what I think we're facing right now across so many parts of inclusion, that we need leaders like the people on this call and Kellogg alumni in our business world to make this a turning point.
Yeah,
a good turning point, I should say, not the other way.
Yeah. No, and I think, like you say, just exposing that whole fault that, let's face it, we know already existed. We know that women were already stressed with the double duty of raising a family, which often, for whichever reasons, fell on them. And now, with COVID really exposing this and taking it to the point where, well, it just can't be managed anymore. And just have some really comprehensive discussions around that, about daycare, or how we can include women with all of their responsibilities, and not make people wrong for those responsibilities. So I'm hoping we'll have a little more compassion for each other after this.
Yes,
What,
absolutely.
what do you see are some of the biggest issues women face in the workplace regarding the distinction of inclusion? And I really like that inclusion distinction. So maybe you can tell me let's talk about what are some of the issues on that.
Sure. So I'm going to combine what I see in the research. And so sometimes when I say that, it doesn't mean everyone is that way, but that's kind of how the research would say, comes up frequently. From an organization standpoint, a lot of times when, the research would say that there is a lower sense of belonging for women, and people that are not the majority. And so, you think of it as joining a company or joining a new department. And frequently, if you're a man, you're going to feel like I'm in, I fit. And frequently, if you're a woman, you feel like I don't fit. I'm not sure what's wrong with this picture. I'm the only one, or I'm fewer. It gets better when it's more diverse, but sometimes when you feel like you don't fit, that leads to you holding back, sometimes not speaking up on things. It leads to this idea of over preparation because I just cannot make a mistake. So, like, you sort of feel under more scrutiny, and there's dynamics that happen with that. I mean, from an individual standpoint, I think research shows that women get less feedback and get more vague feedback. So I think Harry Kramer talked about feed forward and getting really good at giving feedback. I would also say we have to be really good at getting feedback, receiving it, and gaining from it. But feedback's a real gap for women in receiving it. And then there's this issue. It's called in research the double bind. I think of it almost like a seesaw or threading the needle. There are a lot of these phrases to describe this needing to navigate different gender norms. And so, like, we are still relatively new with women in business and women in leadership positions. And we still, men and women, have these gendered norms that women are supposed to be warm and men are supposed to be competent. And in the past command and control kind of world of business, that competence was so important. We're in a new phase of leadership. It's a whole new phase. It's not command and control anymore, and we really need both, that warmth and competence. Margaret Douglas talked about this yesterday. The challenge comes up is when women are perceived as warm, but their competence gets questioned. And this is research that this happens. I can tell you in my own career, I came across as warmth, and eventually I had a mentor and boss tell me, the question on you is that they don't think you're tough enough. And having that feedback, sure, it was harsh, but gosh, it helped me to see I got to dial up those business decisions that I'm making, and I need to still be true to myself, but I need to show what I can do. He saw in me what I could do, but I know that it was about senior management. So great example of feedback that helps support me and mentorship, which is so important for women. But at the same time, we're navigating this warmth and competence. And for women who are, sort of maybe lower on the warmth side of things, they get questioned over, like, she's tough to work at, or God forbid, the B word of being competent. And so it's a really tricky balancing act. We need men and women leaders to be both, but we also need to sort of break the default of what we expect of women. I have a female doctor who's an EMBA student, and she shared that she gets a reaction from people in the operating room and was given feedback on the tone she used when she said scalpel. So you think of, like, we have these sort of images of how women should be. And so that it's just this challenging thing. And what happens is women learn to get things done that they have to play nice. And it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of like emotional labor to do that as well. And so it's a real opportunity. And I feel like it's a game of Twister where you're sort of told all these things that you have to adjust. And it's really just about the status quo and the norms of the past. And so we as leadership, we don't even know we're doing this a lot of times. And so as leaders, we really need to get to know each other so that we can cut to the chase at times. And I don't have to spend all this time playing nice. So I hear that from young women all the time. They've already, they're 28 years old at Kellogg and they've already experienced that in their career. So it's not just a thing of the past.
No, I certainly agree. And I think, some cultures experience and express ourselves differently. I mean, I'm a hugger. I have to physically restrain myself at some points. And I remember one time one of my coworkers came up from Brazil, and she was attending meetings, and she said, Barbara, when I meet so and so, they just stand there. They don't do anything. And so I had to, just very kindly trying to explain to her, well, in the United States, people perceive hugging differently. And so I was willing to give her a hug. I just made sure it was out of eye shot, because I knew people would not perceive it the same way. So and it is a real balance. And I figured the best way to handle it for her was just to explain it and to say, look, it's not that on the opposite side, it's not that these people don't like you or aren't happy that you've traveled all this way from Brazil up to the, cold Virginia winter to spend time with us. They appreciate you. They just cannot, they just don't express it that way. So that's how just standing there translates for an American. So we're getting some wonderful questions in, and I know we were going to talk about some of these topics. So maybe if you don't mind, I'll just jump ahead and look at
Sure.
some of the questions, if that's okay, that relate to things that we talked about with amplification, behavior, and comfort in being uncomfortable. So I've got a question from Jeff as to how can the male leaders of companies advocate for a more inclusive leadership team, and what are the steps that we need to go through to build support for women? Love that question, Jeff. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. I think start with the business case. In particular, first of all, from an organization standpoint, I think you need to start where you are. And if people don't believe in the business case, there's a lot of research out there that validates that more diverse leadership teams lead to better profitability, better growth. So that might be a starting point. I think one of the last speakers also mentioned just getting into the data. So sort of looking across, once you believe in the business case, but looking up and down through the different levels or different functions and department, and really see where do you maybe have a drop off. So that's a really important part of this as well. If you have employee surveys, if you don't, you should, but in employee surveys, you should be having questions about, you should add questions about belonging and belief in future potential. And do I see that here? And if employees believe that it is confidential, which it should be, they will also answer questions about, are they considering leaving in the next 1 to 2 years? And most companies start to see if there's a gap in belonging, a gap in belief that there's going to be, that you have a future here. Many times that leads to that increase in thinking about leaving. And so, I think your case can be on growth, profitability, winning the talent war, stopping or retaining, in particular, millennials, and not just millennial women, millennial men too. They're used to a different world as well. So I think those are some of the big things. I guess I would start with the data, and I think it can be top down so that it becomes a priority. But you really need, in particular, those men who believe in this to model the way and to show that this is important, and to make sure that there's action. We can walk the talk.
Oh, that's great advice. Especially I like the part about, make the business case for it. I mean, we're MBAs, so we can certainly do that. And I think that makes it go from just a good idea and something like a softer sell to say, hey, this is going to favorably impact business, which is also just kind of prevents some of the pushback or lack of enthusiasm that we might otherwise get. And we've also got a question and comment here from William Wong, who's saying that he's mentoring an incredible young woman of color. Great for you for doing that, William. And he's saying, but I can't speak to her about a woman's experience. How can I connect her with women like you, so she can better navigate her future? So again, asking for some practical advice as to where a woman of color could get some good coaching for this type of building an inclusive environment with their own actions.
Yeah, well, I think that creating an inclusive environment and inclusive leadership is a whole company's priority, but I also think there's a real opportunity to create employee resource groups, ERGs as they're called, so that they become safe spaces to connect with people who are like you. I want to make the distinction that I don't believe that the employee resource groups or the minorities are the people who need to do all the work. We really need men to take a hold of this opportunity and help to do that. So that is one way. There's also mentoring programs that can exist in your company. Depending on your company size, they're also generally in the communities you have. There are, I would tell you that we just got a major a donation gift at Kellogg. It was announced on Wednesday, the largest gift from any woman, focused on women's advancement. And so I'm excited to see what we will do with alumni in the next several years as a result of that. So there's opportunities even now to do mentoring as an alum with Kellogg. There are exec ed programs. So there's lots of ways you can have that experience. But I also want to challenge you to say, you may not be a woman, but you could reach out to say, tell me about your experience. And there's just so much about listening and learning, and signaling and really caring about someone's experience. So, we heard in the last session, after the George Floyd killing, so many of us, what do you say? And you might feel the same way. Men need to be part of this conversation. And I think the hardest thing is knowing what to say. And so sometimes you can just say, I don't know what to say, but I care about your advancement, and I want to know more about how I can help. And I just want to know who you are too. So that would be the other challenge I would give.
Oh, that sounds wonderful. I think that would make a huge difference. I'm not a psychologist by profession, but I think that a person would really benefit from that. So we have a question on whether the research that you're doing analyzes the support men give to men versus women versus the support that women give to women. Do you have any thoughts on that, as to has that been studied at all, as to the support gap, if you will, if there is one?
Yeah. So I think it's not my own research, but as I look at the available research that's out there, It's human nature that we connect with and support and lots of times recruit people who are like us. And you know, that's been a big part of the networking of how these kinds of how we get to some of the numbers that we have. And so like that's one thing that does happen. So again, it's kind of break the default of how you would normally support people, or you read a lot anecdotally about people going through and you know, feeling excluded in the pre-COVID days of like all the guys are going out to lunch or those kinds of things. So there's that kind of support. I think that there is mentoring is a huge thing for men and women, and sponsorship. What is said about you when you're not in the room is critically important. I would tell you there's a lot of research that would say that I don't want to get too controversial in this, as you go have dinner possibly with a spouse, but what is said in research is that men believe they are helping out a lot more at home, and women don't see that same percentage. So I'll leave that part at that. And then I hear much more anecdotally, in particular in male-dominated industries, that women don't always support other women. I hate this when I hear this, but I do hear it. And I think the more you have more women in the room and more women in leadership, the more that will go away. When it feels like there is one slot for a woman or a person of color, there is a scarcity model where it sort of feels like, or what I hear and what I see in the research is there's cases where people feel threatened and don't want someone else to be too competitive with them. So the solution of diversity and inclusion takes care of that as well. And I think that, you know, the more we as leaders can call out when people aren't supporting other people, the more we can change our behaviors to help support everyone's voices, the better our organizations are going to be and the better leaders we are. You know, there are numbers in the research also that would say men interrupt women 3 times more than they interrupt men. And I think you'll probably get, if we had everyone's screen on Zoom gallery, we'd probably see a lot of women nodding. And sadly, but you know, it's kind of like it has been the status quo, it's habitual, but that's the kind of thing as a leader, if you can see someone's voice in a meeting not being shared, can you call that out, or can you say, you know, thank you, Mike. I want to hear from some other people in the room. It's another great thing, you know, to help bring out introverts too, because people don't feel like they're belonging if they are not they feel invisible if their voice isn't shared. So it's so critical for us to hear all those voices and to show we care and to show we value. Sorry, I'm going long on some of these. I'm hoping you can look at
these.
Oh,
no, that's great, because I'm seeing a lot of interest in lots of folks in the chat are asking some wonderful questions about this whole idea of support and how we can, you know, support each other. And one question here, like in case of what you would like to highlight for us, Ellen, where it says, Terry's asking, what have you seen some companies and leaders do that you'd like to highlight in terms of leaders and organizations giving women support during these challenging times?
Sure. Well, I think that, you know, what I said before, as far as like the surveys, the data, and really actively going at how can you help to improve wherever your gaps are. So whether that's finding who those role models are and giving them more responsibility in this, helping the whole organization to see the business opportunity. You know, sometimes I hear mixed reviews about bias training. but I'd still say look into the best bias training that is out there and that's very current, because we all have biases. Regardless, we all have biases. And so just even bringing awareness to, wow, here's what my preconceived notion. So bias training, I think coaching, whether it's particular lining up executive coaches for high potential women, or just teaching our leaders and managers how to coach in ways that help really understand someone, but also help give feedback and help our employees see what their futures could be. I think there's a lot around policy, and it's not just policy, it's also usage of that policy. So for example, what's not just your maternity leave policy, do you have a parental leave policy? If you have men taking paternity leave, that tells me it's not just a policy, but they're actually taking it. They are going to be better. They're not only going to be bonded to their child, but also better understand and share responsibilities at home. They're also going to be a more inclusive leader in the organization. And I see bias against men. I'll tell you, I was in a board meeting where a more junior lawyer who attends the board meeting came back first day out of paternity leave, and everyone was congratulating him. And one of the older board members who has 6 kids said, boy, if they had paternity leave in my day, I would have had a year off. And there was just like this stony silence in the room.
Wow.
And so much of the being an inclusive leader and being an inclusive organization, it just lets everyone have a lot more freedom to have their voice. And not every man wants to do the command and control thing. So it also gives more license for men to show more vulnerability. So in the same way that I talked about warmth and competence, men also are in a box, and we have to break the default on all these gender roles. And we're going to be set up for the future to be able to do, I would say for the present, if we can become more inclusive. So, that policy usage is really important. I think Michelle mentioned Amy Edmondson's work on psychological safety, because it's a risk to start making some of these changes or to talk about your family or your vulnerability. So that's a really important thing. I think the more we can amplify voices and the value each person brings, the more we can break the default. As Michelle said, have courageous conversations. What would it take if you are in a review where you're perhaps doing the 9-box model and assessing performance and potential, and someone in the room says, I just don't know about her? Do you have the courage to say, tell me more, and let's take it to, as Jenny said in the last session, to a competence model? Because there's so much that gets attached to women's style or how women operate relative to these norms that we have for them. So having the courage to step up is really going to be important, because I think, as allies, it's no longer enough to say like, yeah, that sounds good. It's kind of not my role. Allies were really expecting to not only build our awareness, to also really take some actions, and whether that's conversations, whether that's taking a stand on something that is basically like outside of what the company values and outside of, whether you call someone out in a meeting or talk to them afterwards, that's how you're going to start to see change. So I'm sorry, there's so many other, I also have to say, Drew, this Mark initiative, I saw when I've been to the Catalyst Awards, which they do all kinds of research, great website. They also recognize companies that have really taken all the actions over a 3-year process, so not like a one and done kind of thing. Mark was a key part of so many companies' success to be able to have men really take steps to advocate and to take action. So that's so great, and it's so much more than just for women. It's really for so that everyone has a voice.
Well, that's
Sorry,
fantastic.
I'm not seeing all these questions here.
Yeah, no, I'm trying to summarize them, and I was wanting to jump in and share about what Drew was saying, which sounds just amazing. It's the first time that I've heard of this, and I think it's absolutely great. And maybe you mentioned that these MARC organizations are taking some steps that are making a real difference. Could you maybe just highlight some of what those steps are, so that we can emulate them or urge them to be emulated and copied? So
so there's a few organizations that are doing retreats or doing training for men to understand what the issues are, and it includes some of the biases, some of the things that women face. It also includes, what the value of having these different diverse perspectives. So some of the things we've talked about, but in a concentrated way that I believe, I haven't attended this, so Drew could share more, but I believe create that safe space to say, what are the concerns? Does this mean I'm not going to get considered for promotion? Does this mean I'm, by all these other groups coming in, what are the fears with that? Because they're real. They're real. And so I think that part of it is being focused on men, being focused on action, but really understanding the issues and the concerns, and what opportunities can be created. Drew, I don't know. How did I do? Let me know in comments. You could probably add on a lot more, or do a talk on this next year.
Oh yeah, that would be great to hear about that. So when we were preparing for this, one of the thoughts that you had shared with me, Ellen, about how Kellogg leaders can become better allies, and giving some good advice. And a couple topics that you mentioned in terms of amplification and behavior, and the comfort and having your comfort level where you can just be comfortable being uncomfortable. So could you touch on those? I know you've touched on a bit of this throughout this discussion, and how women can support women and how men can support women. But I think that this really, as you've outlined it, really speaks to that. And maybe you could just spend a little bit of time on those topics.
Sure. I think maybe first, and it was said in a last discussion, all these discussions seem to build on each other, but seek to understand. I also saw a question in here about how women can support other women. And I think getting to know each other and seeking to understand, what are you up against? I comment on the talk earlier about rituals. Do you start meetings where, hey, in one word, you can put it into Zoom, or we can speak it like in one word, where are you today? I know we do that on the teaching team that I'm on. We do that in my class. And it's like a quick pulse check, but it's also a get to know you better kind of thing. So there's so much of what we've done, what you all have done in this symposium, that I think build on that. I think as we build relationships, one thing that I have not mentioned in this session so far is women of color. I talked about women feeling like they have to be perfect and constantly proving themselves and over preparing. It's 4 times worse for women of color. 4 times worse for women of color. Research that way. So when, so we have to also understand women are not just one thing. They're, this term intersectionality, it's all the different roles that we play or identities that we have that we really need to understand each other and learn to appreciate that. So I think through relationship building and having spaces where you can be safe and get to know each other, there's a lot of training and things where you identify your values, what are pivotal. When we teach leadership, we go through what were pivotal experiences in your life that make you who you are. And when you do those kinds of sessions with people, it really helps you to understand and appreciate each other in new ways. So that is part of the softer skills that are coming with the new kind of leaders that we need for today's environment as well. So, I think those are some of the ways to be better allies, bringing those kinds of things into your organizations. I can't say enough for feedback, even when it's hard to give. In that experience where I learned that the book on me, enable people to know the book on them or how they're perceived is really quite important. And, the person who told me that, we sort of stumbled through the conversation until he finally said, they think you're not tough enough. But you know what? He was with me and he cared enough about my career to tell me what was going on. And so I know we have fears of, I don't want to get sued, or I don't want to say the wrong thing, or I don't want to get, and so it's not so easy, but I think it starts with getting to know each other and expressing that we are in this together, and I want to get you what you want, and I need to know what that is. What do you aspire for in your career, and how can I help you get there? So reel me in. Barbara, I'm like going on all this. I don't know if other questions have come in or if we skipped any along the way.
I think we've covered them, but please ping me to our audience there if there's anything that you would like to. We still have a few more minutes, so please ping me if I didn't, correctly address your question or you'd like more on that. So Terry's asking, once you were told you quote, you were not tough enough, what were the actions that you took to change that perspective?
Thank you, Terry. Great question. So I knew part of it was how I sort of showed up in meetings and things like that. And, I'm someone who I had people telling me, you need to work on your game face and like all those kinds of things as I was early in my career. But in this being tough enough was really about some of the recommendations I made, making it clear that I can make tough business decisions. And I was doing that. It wasn't visible to those above me. And so once I became aware of that, then there was actually a future session that came up where I shared something where I made a recommendation that was the right thing for the business, but it had a big people impact too. And somehow, even though I had done other things, when I presented that afterwards, it was like, check the box, she can do it. And so it was ways to create more visibility and show all sides of me, not just the one that was kind of my first like appearance in meetings. And I also really I still work on how do I step up and speak up. On Kellogg Insight, you'll see some articles from me, and I talk about having self-doubt in the boardroom. And I got feedback of like, you're here for a reason, and we want to have your voice. And so instead of doubting, like, do I fit in or those kinds of things, I personally work like, I'm here for a reason. I already earned it. I need to stop worrying about proving myself and show what I can do and show my opinions.
Yeah, thank you. That was great. And we have another comment from Drew who talking about he's going through a 2-day Deep Mark Summit, and he laughed, cried, reflected, and quickly came to the conclusion that being aware is not enough, and we have to take an active role and advocate every day. Could you just give maybe a couple examples so we would have them as to what would be an example of someone advocating in a way that would be perceived well for the advocator, if there is such a word, as well?
I think advocate for sure in those rooms where you're determining future promotion and potential, and advocating in the sense of, does this person have the competency? I would advocate by really understanding people's aspirations. There is frequently this thing of like, oh, I don't know if she wants that because she just had a baby, or like, oh, her husband has a big job here. And those things are said in those sessions. And you know what? They shouldn't be said, but we should know it's out of good intention. They call that benevolent sexism. But like, you want to know, be an advocate, but you got to know your people. You got to know what they want. And you've got to really assess them, not on their style necessarily, certainly if it gets in the way of building relationships, but on what they can do. So hopefully that helps as well.
Yeah, no, thank you. That sounds that sounds really great. And I think particularly I see that with being a woman of color in the cybersecurity technology field, and just trying to look out and see, okay, who else is here?
Yeah.
And just on a small part, to try to make sure I introduce myself and ask them for lunch or coffee back when we used to do that, and make sure that they were comfortable in the organization. And I think it's really important for all of us to do that, and to not assume that just because the person got hired and they're there and they want to work there, that they're going to be putting on a brave front, and that is still something that we can all do. Not take it for granted that someone is going to feel comfortable as the woman in those situations. And I know that I've had people, men, reach out to me and ask how I'm doing or how it's going, and I've just deeply appreciated that, because they didn't take it for granted. And I made sure that I was a good conversationalist, and didn't try to appear too shocked. Oh my God, nobody's ever said that to me before. That's so thoughtful. No. I understood even that, if that's what I was thinking as a subtopic, just making sure that was that I made the person comfortable as well, because I knew it was kind of a stretch for them too. So but I think that I just think if there's any thing that I can impart from my side, it's just how much and how important that outreach is. And it might seem very small to the person who's doing it, but you can have a huge impact on people. And just what William Wong and the advice there, that people were saying, well, please talk to your mentee about this, and asking her about what her experience is going to be as a woman. And we're just all rooting for you, William, that she will appreciate that. So we've got about 4 minutes left before we wrap up. But are there any other questions or anything that you'd like for? Well, we've got Ellen here with all this wonderful advice and this incredible experience to take a deeper cut at, that we can talk about when we're here.
The other, well, maybe some other questions come in. The other thing I would say, and I'm not sure if Harry mentioned this in the beginning of his talk about boards, is that there is a really big focus from investors on looking at diversity on boards. There is an expectation that the SEC will start to require communication on details about diversity throughout companies. So it's about to happen, and it's really accelerating. So you as a leader, if you can become a great inclusive leader, you are setting yourself up to be really strong in what is going to be needed in the business world. And I see a question on the Catalyst group, the Catalyst I think it's catalyst.org. They have some partnerships, and I believe you can go to their website and see Mark as one of those groups. And so the companies that have really taken this on, they have sent men to the Mark retreats, just like we might send women to some sort of women's empowerment kind of thing. And so we're all learning here. I guess my hope, to borrow from what Michelle Buck said, is that we can, create like a new set of eyes as we look at the future. And I think of all the, the awful things in 2020. One of the silver linings is that, is it the year that we got 2020 vision and saw more clearly what was happening to Black lives, to women. But we really have to create this turning point to go after so many of these things that are just inequities as well.
Well, I love that parting thought, Ellen, about all the difficulties of 2020 as the year giving us 2020 vision. That is absolutely fabulous. Well, it's time for us to wrap up, but I did want to make a pitch here. So first, Ellen, thank you so much for all the preparation that you gave to this, and for your very precious time. Really so much appreciated for spending time with us here in Texas. And I need to make a couple commercials, please. So please don't log off yet. First, could you please visit the Expo Showcase Arena, and especially the AT&T live presentation, and meet the team. And next, we're going to have an automated networking session, and we will have lots of amazing people for you to meet, and fabulous topics and great conversation. You do have to bring your own beer or wine, but we will have everything else that you could possibly want. So thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you at the networking session.
Great. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.